The morning I signed the papers on my penthouse in Clearwater, Florida. I sat on the balcony with a cup of black coffee and watched the Gulf turn from gray to gold. Pelicans glided low over the water. A fishing boat hummed somewhere in the distance. I was 64 years old. I had 31 years of quiet work behind me. And for the first time in over a decade, nobody on this earth knew where I lived. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Nobody knew where I lived. And that felt like the first real breath I had taken in 12 years. My name is Walter. I spent most of my working life as a civil engineer, designing drainage systems and road infrastructure for municipalities across the Southeast. Not glamorous work. Not the kind of thing that gets you on magazine covers. But it was honest. And it paid steadily. And more importantly, it taught me something that would save my life, later: patience. When you are designing a system meant to handle floodwater, you do not rush. You measure twice. You account for variables most people never think about. You build for the worst day imaginable, not the average one. I applied that same thinking to everything. My marriage, my savings, my property portfolio, which I had been building quietly since my early 40s, a duplex here, a small commercial unit there, reinvesting the rent, keeping my name off social media, living in a modest house in Sarasota that gave no hint of what I had accumulated. By the time I turned 62, I owned 11 properties outright, debt-free, generating enough monthly income that I had not needed to touch my engineering pension in 3 years. Nobody in my family knew any of this. And I had very good reasons for that. My daughter is named Renee. She is 41 years old. And she has her mother's eyes and none of her mother's kindness. My late wife, Carol, passed when Renee was 32. Cancer. The kind that moves fast and gives you no room to negotiate. Losing Carol broke something in me that I have spent years carefully gluing back together, piece by piece. But what happened in the months after Carol died that broke something else entirely? Something I am not sure ever fully healed. Carol's life insurance policy paid out $412,000. I was the primary beneficiary. Renee knew this because she had been present when we updated our estate documents 2 years before Carol got sick. What I did not anticipate was how quickly that knowledge would change the way my daughter looked at me. She started calling more after the funeral, visiting more. Her husband, a man named Dennis, who sold commercial HVAC equipment and spent most weekends watching sports and complaining about his boss, suddenly became very interested in spending time with his father-in-law. They would come for dinner. And somewhere between the salad and the main course, the conversation would tilt. How was I managing the finances? Had I thought about consolidating? Did I know that Dennis had a colleague who did estate planning? Had I considered that a man living alone at 62 didn't really need such a big house? I listened. I nodded. I said I would think about it. And I watched. Then one Sunday in October, almost 8 months after Carol's funeral, Renee sat across from me at my kitchen table and told me directly that she thought I should sell the Sarasota house, liquidate my assets, and move into an assisted living facility. She had already toured one. She said, it was very nice. They had a pool. I would make friends. I was 62 years old. I had run a half marathon the previous spring. I still drafted infrastructure plans as a consultant 3 days a week. I had never in my life missed a bill, forgotten an appointment, or given any human being a single reason to question my competence. I set down my coffee cup very carefully, and I asked her what she meant. She said she was worried about me. She said living alone was dangerous at my age. She said she and Dennis had been talking, and they felt it would be better for everyone, better for me, if my affairs were simplified. If I was somewhere safe, if someone was looking after me. I asked her who would manage my assets if I moved into this facility. She looked at Dennis. Dennis looked at the table. Then she looked back at me and said that she and Dennis would be happy to take on that responsibility. To protect me, I stood up from that table, walked to the front door, and held it open until they left. Renee called 3 times that week. I answered twice. Both conversations ended the same way, her voice tightening into that particular frequency she had inherited from nobody I recognized, insisting I was being stubborn, that I was not thinking clearly, that I needed help, whether I wanted it or not. The third call I let go to voicemail. She left a message that lasted 4 minutes and contained the phrase, "We're only trying to do what's best for you." 6 separate times. Then she stopped calling. And then she stopped speaking to me altogether. I learned through my nephew, Marcus Carroll's sister's son, the one decent person who stayed in contact, that Renee had told the extended family I had become erratic, paranoid, that the grief had affected my judgment, that she was heartbroken about it, that she had tried everything. I did not defend myself to any of them. I had learned, through 31 years of engineering, that a poorly designed system does not need your anger. It needs your patience and your documentation. So I documented everything. I kept records. I quietly sold the Sarasota house 18 months later, telling no one, routing the proceeds through an LLC I had established for property management. I used the capital to acquire 2 more units, a 4-plex in Tampa and a small strip of retail in Ocala, and I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of St. Tampa, Petersburg, under a name that, while perfectly legal, was not the name Renee would think to search. I lived simply. I walked every morning. I volunteered twice a week at a literacy program for adults, something Carol had always wanted to do and never had time for. I stayed in contact with Marcus, who visited occasionally and never once asked me about money. His son, Tyler, was 12 when this all began. A quiet, serious kid who liked marine biology and asked more thoughtful questions than most adults I knew. I watched Tyler grow up in the gaps, birthday calls, the occasional weekend when Marcus would bring him down to Clearwater and the 3 of us would go out on a rental boat and drop lines in the Gulf. Tyler got into honors classes. Tyler made the cross-country team. Tyler's father worked 2 jobs and stretched every dollar with the kind of discipline that made me quietly, profoundly proud. And I built. By the time I signed the penthouse papers in Clearwater at 64, my portfolio had grown to a number that, if I said it out loud, would make most people set down whatever they were holding. I will only say that it was enough, more than enough. Enough to do what I had spent 12 years planning to do in silence. The penthouse had 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a wrap-around balcony, and a view of the Gulf that changed color 4 times before noon. I bought it outright. I had it furnished by a designer Marcus's wife recommended. I put a kayak on the balcony storage rack and a good espresso machine on the kitchen counter and a framed photograph of Carol on the bookshelf by the window. I had been living there for 7 months when my phone rang on a Tuesday morning in March. It was a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer. Then, something I cannot explain what, some instinct built from 64 years of reading situations, made me pick up. It was Renee. Her voice was different, softer, a little unsteady, which was so unlike her that for a moment I thought something had happened to someone I cared about. She said she had gotten my number from a mutual acquaintance. She said she had been thinking about me. She said she was sorry we had lost touch. Lost touch. As if we had simply drifted. As if 12 years had happened to us rather than been engineered by her. I said it was good to hear from her. Because I am my mother's son as much as my father's. And my mother taught me that you can be honest without being cruel. She said she and Dennis were going through a hard time. She said the HVAC business had not been doing well. She said they were behind on some things and trying to figure out next steps. She said she had thought about reaching out for a long time and had finally decided that family was too important to let pride get in the way. I said I agreed that family was important. She asked if we could meet. She said maybe she could come visit wherever I was living now. She said she would love to reconnect. I gave her the address. Now, I want you to understand something. This was not naivety. I knew exactly what I was doing. I had known for 12 years what would eventually happen when word got out, and I had made sure, very deliberately, that certain words had gotten out to certain people. My real estate attorney had mentioned to a colleague who was connected to Renee's social circle that Walter had done very well for himself. Very well. That was the phrase I used. I wanted it to travel. It did. Renee arrived on a Thursday afternoon. She came alone, which surprised me. She stood in the doorway of the penthouse and looked at the Gulf view, and I watched her face do the calculations in real time. Her eyes moved from the view to the furniture, to the art on the walls, to the espresso machine, to the photograph of Carol. Then they moved back to me. She hugged me. It was the first time in 12 years. I made coffee. We sat on the balcony. She talked about how much she had missed me. She talked about how wrong she had been. Back then, to push so hard. She said she had not known how to grieve Carol and had taken it out on the wrong people. She said Dennis had changed. She said she had changed. I listened. I watched the pelicans. I refilled her cup. Then she said it. She said they were losing their house. She said Dennis owed money she was vague about to whom. And I did not press, and that they needed somewhere to stay while they sorted things out. Just temporarily. She looked at the 3 bedrooms. She looked at me. She said she knew it was a lot to ask. I said I understood how hard it must have been to make that call. She exhaled. Her shoulders dropped. She started talking faster. Dennis was going to look for work in Tampa. She would help with the place. She was a good cook. She had missed me so much. We had wasted so many years. She just wanted her father back. I let her finish. Then I told her I wanted to show her something. I stood up and walked to the small desk in the study, where a manila folder sat in the center of the blotter. I brought it to the balcony table and set it in front of her. She opened it. Inside was a document from my attorney, a letter summarizing the structure of my estate. The properties were held in an irrevocable trust, established 2 years earlier. The beneficiary of that trust was a scholarship fund in Carol's name, administered through a foundation I had set up, with Marcus and Tyler's college fund as the primary recipients of the remainder interest. My assets were not accessible to me in any liquid form that could be redirected. They were locked, legal, permanent. Renee read the first page, then the second. Then she set it down. I told her that I had made these arrangements specifically because I had spent 12 years watching what grief and money could do to a family. I told her I had loved her mother completely, and I intended to make sure that love produced something lasting and real. I told her that the scholarship had already funded 3 first-generation college students in Pinellas County, and that by next fall it would fund 2 more. She asked about the penthouse. I told her it was rented. A long-term lease. Not owned. That was true. I had structured it that way on purpose. The LLC owned the building. The trust owned the LLC. Walter, the man sitting across from her with a cup of coffee, was a tenant. She looked at me for a long time. I could see the moment when the calculation completed and came up 0. Then she said something that I think she meant as an accusation. But that landed on me as the finest compliment I had received in years. She said, "You planned all of this." I said yes. I had. The same way I had planned every drainage system I ever designed. For the worst day imaginable. Not the average one. She left an hour later. I did not ask her to stay for dinner. I stood at the balcony railing and watched her car pull out of the parking structure below and turn south toward the highway. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. I felt tired in the way that only the end of a very long project makes you feel. The kind of tired that has a future in it. I called Marcus that evening. He already knew some of what had happened. I had kept him informed in outline, if not in detail, because he was the one person in my orbit who had earned that trust. I told him Renee had visited. I told him how it had gone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You doing okay?" "Uncle Walt." I told him I was better than okay. I was exactly where I had always been trying to get. He asked if I was still planning to come up for Tyler's track meet at the end of the month. I said I had already booked the hotel. Tyler ran the 5K that Saturday in just under 19 minutes. I stood at the finish line with a paper cup of lukewarm coffee and watched him cross. Chest heaving. Shoes worn thin at the right heel, the way his father's always were. Afterward, he found me in the crowd, and he shook my hand like a young man, which he nearly was now. And he said, "Thanks for coming. Grandpa Walt. He is not my grandson by blood." He never felt the need to mention that. I never felt the need to correct him. 3 weeks after Renee's visit, I received a certified letter from her attorney suggesting that the trust structure might be contestable on grounds of diminished capacity at the time of signing. My attorney responded within 48 hours with a letter that was, by all accounts, exceptionally thorough. The matter was not pursued further. I have not heard from Renee since. I heard through Marcus, several months later, that Dennis had found work with a logistics company in Atlanta, that they had relocated, that things were stabilizing, which I was genuinely glad to hear. Because whatever Renee had become, she was still Carol's daughter, and Carol had loved her fiercely and without condition. And that means something to me even now. But I also know that love without accountability is just sentiment. Carol knew that too, even if she could never quite bring herself to say it to Renee's face. I said it with a manila folder and 12 years of quiet arithmetic, which is perhaps not what either of us would have chosen. But it was honest, and it held. The mornings here are still the best part. I am up before 6 most days. Coffee on the balcony. Watching the Gulf change color the way it does. Gray first, then the faintest rose, then something between copper and gold that I have never found the right word for. The pelicans come through around 7:15. I have learned to recognize a few of them by their flight patterns, which Marcus tells me is exactly the kind of thing a retired engineer would do. And he is not wrong. I kayak on Tuesdays and Thursdays, when the weather allows. I volunteer at the literacy program every Monday morning. I am teaching a man named Gerald, who is 58 and drove trucks for 30 years and never had the time to read at a level that lets him get through a newspaper without stopping. Gerald told me last month that he had read an entire sports column by himself, front to back, and understood it. He said it was the first time reading had ever felt like something that belonged to him. I thought about what Carol would have said to that. I thought she would have cried. The good kind. And then she would have laughed at herself for crying. I thought she would have been very, very pleased. Tyler got into the University of Florida this spring. Marine biology. Full scholarship. Partly from his own merit. Partly from the fund. His mother called it a miracle. Marcus, who knows better, just smiled and said the kid had earned every bit of it. He had. And so had the people who believed in him long before it was obvious that they should. I keep the balcony door open in the evenings now. The Gulf air comes through with a smell I cannot fully describe, salt and distance and something older than anything I have ever built. Some nights I sit out there until the light is completely gone, and the water turns black, and the lights of the boats appear one by one like slow stars. I am 66 years old. I have everything I need, and nothing I do not. And if that sounds too simple to be the end of a long story, I would only say this: simple is what you earn after complicated. Simple is not where you start. It is where you arrive. If you are patient enough, and honest enough, and if you do the work, all of it, the visible and the invisible. without ever once letting someone else tell you what you are worth. Carol knew what I was worth. Gerald is starting to know what he is worth. Tyler, standing at that finish line with his chest heaving and his worn-out shoes, is figuring out what he is worth. The rest of it, the people who only came back when they thought there was something to take, they will have to find their own way to that answer. I cannot carry that for them. He tried. For longer than I should have. And then I set it down. Very carefully. The way you set down something heavy that was never yours to carry in the first place. And I walked out to the balcony. And I watched the water. And I was at peace.